Hi, I'm doing my opener on the Saratov approach, which was directed by Garrett Batty in 2013. So, basic summary of the movie is that there are two missionaries in Russia, and they're kidnapped by men posing as investigators when they go to teach them, and they're held by ransom to be paid by the church because the men know that the church has money. And throughout the time that they're held hostage, they're struggling with the idea of escape. And the community in America comes together to support the family and pray for them. And then the missionaries, they form a relationship with their captor Nikolai, and in the end the captors end up letting them go free when no ransom is paid, and they thought they were going to be killed. So my connection is concerning the innocence of the kidnapped victims. um, and I would specifically like to tie it to the film Silence of the Lambs with the character Catherine Martin. So, Catherine Martin, she was kidnapped while helping a man that was posing as being disabled. And while she was held captive, there were several shots of how the parents were affected by her being held captive. And it also showed kind of their emotional struggle. And it also shows how she turned to violence and desperation for escape. And so those are three parallels that I saw between this victim and the victims in the Saratov approach. So the first one, when she's kidnapped while trying to help, her captor, he was pretending to have a broken arm and trying to lift a couch into his van. And she saw this, and her being a good citizen and having a big heart, she went to try to help him, and he used her goodness and willingness to help to lure her into her van, where he then attacked her and kidnapped her. And so the same goes for the Saratov approach. They were missionaries of the church, and their potential captors saw them as being eager to help people, and they took advantage of that goodness and willingness to help and used that to lure them into their apartment, where they then beat them and kidnapped them. And I'd like to point out that in both of these shots, they're pretty dark. And once the missionaries get in the house, too, especially, the colors turn to be a lot more dark. And so that kind of, those formal elements are also parallels in these two scenes. So in both of the films, there also is the effect on the parents, which is portrayed. In Silence of the Lambs, the mother is a senator and is trying to do anything she can to help her daughter, but she's limited. And this kind of shows her um, being emotionally distraught. And these are two shots of the different mothers in the Saratov approach as they're learning about the situation and kind of their position of not being able to help when they would like to help. And that kind of shows the same emotion of being distraught. And it's kind of the same shot, a close up of each of them. And while keeping them in that third section of the frame, following the rule of thirds as well. Um, and so the third point that was a parallel between the two was that they turned to violence and desperation for escape. Catherine, she lured her captor's dog into the well where she was being held and was threatening to kill the dog. And the two elders were planning on beating Nikolai in order to escape. This shows him holding an iron ready to carry out their plan. And he was also having dreams fantasizing about beating Nikolai as well to escape. And so this kind of shows their innocence being put at risk as they're willing to put others in harm's way in order to escape. But both of them ended up not going through with their plan. And Catherine ends up actually keeping the dog with her and coming to love it. And they end up actually praying for Nikolai and wanting what's best for him and being sympathetic towards him. So the people that they were planning on harming, they ended up actually forming a bond with instead. And so that kind of helps them maintain their innocence. And so I'd also like to point out the connection of the innocence of Christ and how that parallels to the innocence of the missionaries. When Christ was on the cross, the last thing that he said was, one of the last things that he said was, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And he was talking about the people that had captured him and were mistreating him and killing him. And that element of forgiveness and care for them was shown with the missionaries as well. This was particularly highlighted in the film when a man that had been kidnapped in the past as a missionary called their parents and told them the feelings of sympathy and love they ended up having for their captors as time went on in captivity. And he said eventually they'll start to pray for them. And then as he was saying this, there were shots of the two elders praying. And in the end, the elders were also talking to Nikolai, who was asking them to pray for him. And so this kind of shows how their goodness and innocence pulled through even at the worst of times when they thought they were facing death. So my two questions are, number one, to compare the opening scene with the scene as it plays out in real time in the film, which is the scene of them planning on taking out Nikolai and escaping. And how do the formal elements change the feel of each scene? Because there are a few things that are different in the two scenes, even though it's showing the same events. And then my second question is, how are the victims' innocence and goodness portrayed throughout the film? And that is all I have. Thank you.